Walking toward my favorite bookstore, something caught my attention. A small poster stuck to a lamppost. "Are you free?" it asked in bold black letters. I smiled, a philosophical provocation amid the urban chaos. But as the day went on, that question echoed in my mind. Seated in the bookstore, flipping through a book on political philosophy, I observed the people around me and out on the street. Some glued to their phones, others in hurried conversations, everyone in constant motion, but going where? Were they truly free? That's when I noticed a group of young people laughing. A girl was imitating a famous politician, exaggerating his mannerisms and catchphrases. Everyone laughed out loud. It was a satire, and I realized they weren't just laughing at the public figure, but at the very illusion of power he projected. Suddenly, I understood what had been bothering me. It wasn't the poster. It was the sense that control was everywhere. In politics, in speeches, in ads that promised happiness in exchange for obedience. But there, in the laughter of those young people, there was a silent resistance. I didn't know it yet, but that was just the beginning of a journey of discovery about true power. That afternoon, I decided to visit an old friend, Henry. He's a retired philosophy professor. His apartment was a living library, with overflowing bookshelves and loose pages filled with notes. I shared the story about the poster and the young people, and he smiled, adjusting his glasses. "Did you notice what they did? Humor is a weapon. When we laugh at something, we strip away its aura of power. It's the antidote to psychological inflation." "Psychological inflation?" I asked. I'd never heard of that. "You're the one who studies Carl Jung. He talked about it." I still felt confused, and I think it showed, because he went on explaining. Basically, it's when leaders identify so much with their roles that they believe they are more than they really are. But humor deflates them. And look, the opposite is also true. There's psychological deflation among the people. They lose confidence, project power onto leaders, and forget their own strength. But as he explained the concept, I remained silent, reflecting. It wasn't just a political matter. It was psychological, and maybe even spiritual. In the days that followed, that conversation with Henry stayed with me. I began to observe more closely. At work, colleagues accepted absurd orders without question. On the subway, eyes fixed on glowing screens, absorbing news and opinions without critique. In conversations, the same rehearsed speeches, as if thoughts were being recited in unison. And then I saw myself reflected in store windows as I walked. I was absorbed too, following schedules, repeating routines, believing in empty promises. Had I lost my own personal power? One night on my way home, I heard an argument in the hallway. A young man was confronting the building manager. "You have no right to forbid us from using the rooftop," he protested. The manager, puffed up with authority, claimed those were orders from above. But the young man didn't back down. There was courage in his voice. Then, other residents stepped out of their apartments, supporting him. There it was, a spark of personal power. Not empty rebellion, but the refusal to accept a senseless order. And I realized that personal power isn't about absolute control, but about awareness and choice. And I needed to discover mine. Looking at my own life, I realized that true power wasn't about shouting louder, but about knowing myself. I started with small changes. I woke up earlier, exercised, and challenged myself to learn skills I'd always avoided. Cooking, meditating, drawing. They were simple acts, but each one gave back a bit of the confidence I had lost. Personal power isn't just resistance to external control. It's mastery over yourself. After understanding this, something changed in me. I began to see humor as a subtle weapon. In the office, where there had once been tense silence, I started making light jokes, poking fun at absurd rules. My colleagues smiled, and even one coworker, once so rigid, seemed less imposing. I realized that humor disarms. It exposes the ridiculousness of excessive control and brings relief. At a social gathering, Henry told me an anecdote about an old king who took himself so seriously that he banned laughter in his kingdom. And of course, he was defeated by the court jester. Now, as I walk through the streets, I see the world with new eyes. It's not just about challenging authority or laughing at their pretensions. It's about being aware, knowing where others' control ends and mine begins. True freedom is internal. It's when you know that no one can take from you what truly matters: your awareness, your dignity, your personal power. I finally understood myself as someone who is free. Once, Carl Jung wrote, "Synchronicity is a causal connecting principle, a meaningful parallelism between psychic events and external facts." It is not about superstition or magical thinking, but rather a theoretical hypothesis deeply rooted in clinical and phenomenological observation. Through years of analytical work, Jung noticed that certain coincidences could not be reduced to mere chance. They seemed to symbolically reflect the inner state of the individual. At times, the external world appears to bend to the inner rhythm of the psyche, not out of obedience, but out of correspondence. Let us consider the episode of the poster. Are you free? A generic question at first glance, stuck to a lamppost on the street, overlooked by hundreds who passed by without noticing it. Yet, it was precisely in that moment, on the way to the bookstore, in a mildly expanded state of awareness, that the phrase stood out as a calling. Why that question on that day, in that place? The answer is not causal. It's not that someone put up the poster and therefore a deep philosophical reflection was inevitable. The relationship between the two events, the poster and the observer's existential crisis, is not one of cause, but of shared meaning. This is the essence of synchronicity. For the wise, the interest is not in the magic of coincidence, but in the symbolic structure of reality. The question emerging in the material world strikes a resonant chord in the soul. It is as if the universe, in its silent language, responds to what consciousness has not yet put into words. This is the crucial point. Synchronicity requires listening. It requires the individual to cultivate a mind that is open, but not naive, critical, but not cynical, sensitive, but not superstitious. From a psychological perspective, synchronicity marks the moment when the unconscious is symbolically projected onto the external world, seeking integration. Analytical psychology understands the human being as a system in pursuit of wholeness, what Jung called the individuation process. Synchronicity is a milestone in this process, a mirror that appears at the right time to reveal forgotten parts of the self. A poster, a conversation, a song that plays when we need it most. All of this becomes a symbol, or more precisely, an archetypal event. The symbolic universe in which synchronicity operates cannot be reduced to linear logic. It is the realm of myths, dreams, and archetypal images that transcend cultures. The poster is not just an object, it becomes a coded message for the one ready to receive it. That is why synchronicity is experiential, not explanatory. It proves nothing, it reveals. However, it is important to stress, not every coincidence is synchronicity. The criterion is profound personal meaning. A repeating number might be mere statistics, or it might be a symbolic form pointing towards something that needs attention. The difference lies in the internal state of the observer. Synchronicity is always relational, between the world and the subject. When both are in tune, something extraordinary can emerge. At its core, synchronicity reminds us that we are more than productive functions in a system. We are bearers of soul, travelers on a journey that demands listening, interpretation, and the courage to recognize that the outer world, at times, becomes a mirror of the inner world. And when that reflection appears, It is up to us not to look away. In urban routine, almost everything pushes us toward automatism. We wake up, turn on the phone, open our email, repeat the same routes, speak in ready-made phrases. It's an invisible theater where everyone plays their role, often without knowing why. And then, suddenly, something small breaks that flow. A poster, a burst of laughter, a phrase overheard by chance. But it's not the event itself that holds power. It's the expanded state of awareness of the one experiencing it. Attention here is not forced focus. It is open presence. It is allowing oneself to be touched by what would normally go unnoticed. It is looking at what has always been there and realizing it was never just that. This kind of perception cannot be forced, but it can be cultivated. It's like developing the nose of a tracker. Over time, sensitivity increases. You begin to notice patterns, meaningful repetitions, feelings that emerge with certain people or places. Reality, which once seemed linear and blunt, reveals layers. It's like discovering that the city map has hidden trails that only appear under certain lights. But whoever's on autopilot will never see them. There is a practical wisdom in this path. By cultivating presence, you avoid the trap of wanting to interpret everything as a sign. Yet the paradox is that the more present you are, the less you need to chase answers. They come, sometimes quietly, sometimes like lightning. But when you are in process, those experiences carry the flavor of meaning. At heart, the explorer discovers that attention is a kind of compass. It doesn't point outward, but inward. And when the outer world begins to align with that inner movement, what Carl Jung called synchronicity is born. The journey of consciousness doesn't require great feats. It requires clear eyes. And perhaps, in the middle of an ordinary street, stuck to an ordinary lamppost, you'll discover the next step toward your freedom. Personal power is the ability to influence and control your own life by making decisions aligned with your values and goals. Unlike external power, which depends on status, money, or authority, personal power comes from within, based on self-knowledge and autonomy. In modern society, however, many lose contact with their personal power, surrendering their autonomy to leaders, institutions, or even to fear. This happens due to two phenomena described by psychologist Carl Jung: psychological inflation and deflation. Psychological inflation occurs when individuals, especially leaders, over-identify with roles of authority, believing they possess unquestionable superiority. They become arrogant, disconnected from reality, and obsessed with control. Psychological deflation, on the other hand, is the opposite. Ordinary citizens see themselves as powerless, undervalue their own abilities, and project power onto external figures such as politicians or experts. In addition, Carl Jung presents us with the concept of synchronicity, the idea that events may be connected by deep meaning, even without a direct causal relationship. For those who cultivate personal power, synchronicity becomes a compass. Meaningful coincidences begin to serve as signs that guide decisions and strengthen trust in one's own journey. These concepts are fundamental to understanding why personal power is so rare in a society where many prefer to obey rather than question, and where fear is often used as a tool of control. But reclaiming personal power begins with self-knowledge. This means understanding your beliefs, emotions, and limitations. Techniques such as meditation, journaling, and behavior analysis can support this process. However, it is important to remember that personal power is not about dominating others. It's about mastering oneself. One powerful tool is humor. Carl Jung stated that humor has the power to deflate figures who consider themselves superior. Laughing at the exaggerations of authority is a way to regain perspective and avoid being dominated by fear. Humor reveals the absurdity in situations of excessive control and allows people to see the fragility behind masks of power. Another crucial aspect is action. Personal power is strengthened through practice. This might include learning new skills, strengthening the body through physical exercise, and developing the ability to communicate clearly and assertively. Small, daily victories build a solid foundation of confidence. Synchronicity in this context also plays a key role. As one cultivates personal power and remains attentive to personal development, it becomes common to notice certain opportunities, encounters, or insights appearing at just the right time. What seems like chance may actually be a symbolic confirmation that one is on the right path. When individuals reclaim their personal power, society is transformed. People who are aware of their capacities are less susceptible to manipulation, fear, and authoritarian control. They question senseless orders, demand respect, and know when to say no. However, a society where personal power is weakened is vulnerable to authoritarian regimes. Psychologically inflated leaders face little resistance because they're dealing with a population that already sees itself as powerless. That's why humor, questioning, and education are essential weapons. True freedom is not merely a matter of the absence of external oppression, but of the ability to consciously choose how to live. And this is only possible when personal power is cultivated and protected, when synchronicity is perceived, and when humor reveals the absurdity of excessive control. Personal power, from this perspective, is not about defeating others, gaining status, or dominating situations. It is about remembering who you are when no one is watching. It is about reclaiming forgotten confidence, healing a silenced voice, and rebuilding self-esteem with bricks of presence and truth. When you recognize your own dignity, even after years of submission or silence, something shifts, not instantly, but deeply. When we learn to welcome our insecurities, something powerful happens within us. We stop seeking outside what has always lived inside. In this process, humor, as discussed by Jung, becomes a form of medicine. It breaks the armor of the inflated ego and invites us to laugh at the absurd seriousness with which control imposes itself. Sometimes, laughter is the first breath after years of silent oppression. And this laughter has a psychic function. It soothes pain, disarms fear, and brings lightness to keep going. To heal, then, is to reclaim personal power. And that power is born from integration, not perfection. It is knowing that you can be vulnerable and still worthy, that you can be afraid and still take action, that you may have been shaped by oppressive systems and still consciously choose to step out of them. It is this choice, made day after day, even in the smallest acts, that rebuilds the soul. The world can be hostile, yes, but the soul, when listened to, is a home. And even if chaos continues outside, there is a center within us that remains, and it invites you to return to it. Because healing is, above all, remembering who you never stopped being.